Imagine having your most intimate phone conversations recorded, leaked to the press, and published for the entire world to read. Now imagine those conversations exposed that your husband, the future king of England, had been cheating on you for your entire marriage with the same woman, who helped arrange your wedding, who called you the mouse and told him to marry you because you were dim enough to control. This isn't a nightmare scenario. This actually happened to Princess Diana in 1992, when tapes codenamed Camillagate revealed Prince Charles telling his mistress, Camilla Parker Bowles, that he wanted to live inside her underwear and be reincarnated as her tampon. Yes, really? The future King of England, the man 700 million people watched marry a beautiful 19-year-old virgin in the wedding of the century, was caught on tape having phone sex with a married woman. And that was just the beginning of the revelations that would destroy the British monarchy's carefully constructed fairy tale. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the clues were there from day one if anyone had been paying attention. The night before Charles and Diana's wedding on July 29th, 1981, someone spotted a blonde woman leaving the royal train in darkness. Everyone naturally assumed it was Diana, stealing a secret moment with her prince before their big day. Wrong. It was Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles's mistress was literally with him the night before he married Diana, and nobody said a word. Even at 19 years old, Diana must have realized something was terribly wrong. What kind of man conducts a royal courtship with a married woman forever hovering over his shoulder, watching every move, giving constant advice? But Diana was too young, too inexperienced, too hopeful that marriage would change everything. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that Camilla herself had designed. Here's the part that'll make your blood boil. Camilla had sized Diana up years before and told Charles to marry her, called her the mouse, said she was dim, uneducated, a naive girl from a broken home who would do exactly as she was told. Diana was young enough to be molded, controllable, perfect for producing heirs, while Charles continued his real relationship with Camilla. They actually calculated this. But they made one catastrophic miscalculation. They underestimated the spark inside Diana. That spark would eventually ignite into a fire that burned down their lies and expose the rot at the heart of the world's most famous monarchy. And when the tapes were finally leaked in 1992, the truth became undeniable. But how did those recordings get made? Who bugged the phones? And why were they released at exactly the right moment to destroy both Charles and Diana? The answers will shock you. The fairy tale died on the honeymoon, though the world didn't know it yet. Charles and Diana spent 2 months at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands. Sounds romantic, right? Here's what actually happened. The moment they left Balmoral, Charles went hunting in Wiltshire, and riding in that exact same hunting party on that exact same day was Camilla Parker Bowles. This wasn't coincidence. This was Charles returning to his real love the second his royal obligation was fulfilled. While newspapers published romantic photos of the newlyweds, Charles had already resumed the affair that would haunt Diana for 13 years. Hunting was Camilla's territory. Polo, architecture, painting, country pursuits. She and Charles had everything in common. Diana, a city girl who found horses boring and country life tedious, never stood a chance. But here's what Charles needed from Camilla that reveals everything wrong with him and nothing wrong with Diana. Camilla mothered him in ways no other woman ever had, including his own mother, Queen Elizabeth. Charles grew up emotionally neglected by a queen too busy with state duties to provide maternal affection, and a father, Prince Philip, who dismissed human emotions as character weakness. Philip himself had been unfaithful throughout his marriage, returning to bachelor haunts around London, while the Queen suffered severe depressions that the palace hid from the public. The palace even had to announce in the mid-1950s that there was no rift in the royal marriage, which was striking and unusual enough that everyone knew something was badly wrong. When Prince Andrew was born in February 1960, 9 months after Philip returned from a suspicious voyage, people assumed the marriage had stabilized. It hadn't. This was the dysfunctional family Diana married into. Charles needed someone who would listen to his problems, validate his feelings, let him rest his head on her shoulder like the mother he never had. Camilla became both mother and lover, a toxic psychological cocktail Diana couldn't compete with. How do you fight someone who fills childhood trauma holes? You can't. Diana tried every normal thing a wife does to interest her husband and win him back. She dressed beautifully. She learned about his interests. She gave him 2 sons. None of it mattered. Charles was already too emotionally dependent on Camilla to let her go. And the royal family? They knew. The Queen knew. Prince Philip knew. They all knew about the affair, and they did absolutely nothing to help Diana. In fact, they made things worse in ways you won't believe. The psychological torture of living in that situation nearly killed Diana, literally. She developed bulimia nervosa, a brutal eating disorder where sufferers binge on food, then purge through vomiting. This wasn't about vanity or wanting to be thin for photos. This was Diana's only way to control something in a life where she controlled nothing. She couldn't control her husband's affair. She couldn't control the palace's cold indifference. She couldn't control the relentless press attention. But she could control her body, even if it was destroying her. People close to her watched her waste away. At state banquets, she pushed food around her plate, eating almost nothing. She survived on chocolate bars to maintain enough energy for royal duties. Her weight plummeted dangerously. And Charles's reaction? He was repulsed by her illness. Instead of getting his suffering wife help, instead of acknowledging his role in her breakdown, Charles withdrew physically and emotionally. They stopped sleeping together. He spent even more time with Camilla, calling her late at night even during official tours abroad. Diana would lie awake in hotel rooms knowing her husband was on the phone with his mistress. The betrayal was constant and crushing. But here's where Diana's genius emerged. She realized that public love was her only protection against palace conspiracies. They couldn't completely destroy her if the world adored her. So she weaponized her star power. She brought Hollywood glamour to dusty royal traditions. She wore daring necklines, short skirts, designer gowns that made headlines worldwide. She knew exactly which angles worked for cameras. She understood that in the television age, image was power, and she wielded that power brilliantly. On tours to Australia, Canada, India, Japan, everywhere Diana went, crowds chanted her name. They reached over Charles to touch her. They asked him where Diana was when he appeared alone. "There's only me," he'd snap resentfully, his ego unable to handle being second place to his own wife. Diana's popularity became a weapon she used to fight back. In 1984, at the state opening of Parliament, she showed up with a dramatically different hairstyle, hair swept up, exposing her bare neck for the first time. It was front-page news everywhere. The Queen was furious. Princess Margaret pulled Diana aside and told her she must never upstage the Queen again. But the message was clear. Diana had learned how to use public attention to assert power in a family that wanted her silent and invisible. And Charles resented her for it so much that he could never see her as a wife or companion or soulmate. He was just perpetually upset that she was more popular than him. Which brings us to 1992, the year everything exploded. 1992. The year the British called Annus Horribilis, a horrible year. In March, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson announced their separation. In April, Princess Anne's 18-year marriage ended in a 4-minute quickie divorce. In June, a book called Diana, Her True Story by Andrew Morton revealed that Diana had attempted suicide multiple times, that Charles had never stopped seeing Camilla, that the marriage had been dead for years. Palace officials called it fiction. They were lying. Diana had secretly cooperated with the book, recording hours of audio answering Morton's questions. In August, Topless photos of Sarah Ferguson on holiday with her financial advisor were published worldwide. In November, Charles and Diana went to Korea on a state visit and could barely look at each other. The press called them the Glums. Then came the tapes. First, Squidgygate, a recorded phone conversation between Diana and her friend James Gilby. He called her Squidgy as a pet name. The tape revealed Diana calling the royals this family with contempt, saying her life was real torture, desperate for affection from anyone. The recording was mysteriously intercepted and leaked to the press. Who bugged Diana's phone? The official story was that amateur radio enthusiasts accidentally picked it up. But experts didn't buy it. The recording was too clean, too perfectly edited, too strategically timed. Many believed MI5, Britain's secret intelligence service, had bugged the phone for national security to monitor the future king's wife. Others thought Charles's supporters bugged her to gather evidence of instability for a divorce. Either way, Diana's private pain was weaponized against her. But then Camelagate dropped, and it was game over for Charles. This tape featured an intimate conversation between Charles and Camilla discussing when they could next see each other, saying things so sexually explicit that newspapers barely knew how to print them. Charles told Camilla he wanted to be her tampon. He talked about living inside her trousers. The future King of England, the supreme governor of the Church of England, caught on tape in an adulterous affair, saying things that would make sailors blush. The British public was disgusted. Charles's approval ratings plummeted. You can spin a lot of things, but you can't spin the heir to the throne telling his married mistress he wants to be reincarnated as her menstrual product. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major stood in Parliament and announced what everyone knew: the Prince and Princess of Wales were separating. The fairy tale was officially dead. But the question remains, who really bugged those phones, and why? Let's talk about the royal family dysfunction that created this disaster. Because Diana didn't marry into a normal family, she married into a generational pattern of infidelity, emotional neglect, and broken marriages. Start with Charles's parents. Queen Elizabeth was 21 when she married Prince Philip of Greece. She fell in love with him immediately when she was 17 and never looked at another man. Philip, on the other hand, always found royal life boring and tedious. After Charles's birth, Philip returned to his old bachelor haunts around London. The Queen's sister Margaret kept her informed about rumors. The palace had to publicly deny marriage problems in the 1950s, highly unusual and striking enough that everyone knew something was wrong. Philip went on long voyages aboard the royal yacht Britannia, where something was very badly wrong, according to rumors. He conveniently returned in April 1959, and Prince Andrew was born the next February, which made people think the marriage was solid. It wasn't. Prince Philip dealt with family problems by dismissing emotions as character weakness. He's often accused of being an uncaring father with an uncertain temper. While the Queen tried to spread oil on troubled waters, Philip just stamped his foot and told everyone to pull themselves together. Not exactly helpful when your son's marriage is disintegrating. The Queen herself lacked natural motherly instincts. She was a typical example of the upper class who never really wanted to see much of their children. Kids were brought in at 5:30, nanny appeared at 6 o'clock, and parents went back to their own lives. People who knew the Queen well said if she'd taken as much trouble over raising her children as she did over raising and breeding her racehorses, things would have been better. Preoccupied with state affairs and her passion for horses, the Queen was far too lenient with her children. When duty called, the kids always took second place. This created a royal family that was less a family than a club. They became independent at very early ages, expected to stand on their own feet. There wasn't a framework for discussing deeper emotional issues, a tremendous weakness that would destroy the next generation. The temptation to become arrogant was immense, and they fell into it completely. Prince Andrew once left his car near St. James's Palace. Police didn't know whose it was and were about to do a controlled explosion. They discovered it was his just in time, And he rolled up later saying those stupid policemen instead of apologizing for his own negligence. Nobody had the courage to tell him, "You're the fool, sir." This was the family Diana married into, surrounded by servants and sycophants, deaf to advice, convinced they could do no wrong. And when Diana's spark and popularity threatened their comfortable delusions, they turned on her with a viciousness she never anticipated. While Diana suffered privately, she transformed publicly into something the royal family had never seen, a genuine humanitarian who connected emotionally with suffering people. She didn't just show up at charity events and smile vacantly. She held dying AIDS patients in her arms when the world still feared touching them. She visited leper colonies. She walked through minefields. She brought real compassion to every cause she touched because she knew what it felt like to be rejected, isolated, hurting. Her work with AIDS charities and the British Leprosy Trust raised awareness for diseases most people thought had disappeared. If she hadn't been a glamorous, good-looking woman, nobody would have used her picture or promoted her work. But she was, and she weaponized that glamour for good causes. Her fashion choices did enormous amounts to promote Britain's image abroad. During a visit to Bonn, she wore an exquisite matching set of sapphire and diamond jewels, a gift from the Sultan of Oman worth £500,000. In Kuwait, she received a chest of 22-karat gold jewelry. She dressed to honor local customs in the Gulf states, wearing modest, ankle-length skirts with covered arms and shoulders, having designers produce entire wardrobes for single weeks. Her hats became legendary. She had nearly 100 and helped make them fashionable again. Fashion experts said she should be on the cover of Vogue. Her sense of style boosted the British fashion industry enormously. But this success got her in trouble with the royal family, who took absolutely no notice of her achievements. She got sick of being ignored and learned how to upstage them. The most famous incident happened in Australia during a visit to Charles's old music school. His professor invited him to play a few notes on the cello. Obviously embarrassed, Charles had forgotten how to play. He made pathetic attempts to appease the audience while Diana waited impatiently. Then she couldn't wait any longer. She strode across the room to the piano, sat down, and started splashing chords brilliantly. Her performance was greatly appreciated, especially by the professor. Embarrassed, Diana exited in a hurry, but she'd stolen the limelight again. As long as she upstaged him, Charles would resent her presence at his side. He couldn't overcome that resentment enough to see her as a wife, companion, or soulmate. He was just perpetually upset that she was more popular, and that resentment, combined with his obsession with Camilla, meant the marriage was doomed from the start. But Diana kept trying desperately to save it, even as the pressure was destroying her from the inside out. By the early 1990s, Diana was fighting a losing battle. During a family holiday in Spain, as guests of King Juan Carlos, Charles appeared distant and preoccupied. These arranged pictures of happy family life told a different story. Charles left the holiday early and returned to Balmoral to be with Camilla. Diana tried every trick in the book, everything a normal woman does to interest a man and win him back. She shared his love of opera. They had 2 children in common. None of it mattered. He was already too involved with Camilla, who provided the intellectual soulmate and emotional understanding he craved. The pressure was destroying Diana physically and mentally. Her bulimia worsened. Her friends worried about her dramatic weight loss. She turned to several male friends for support and understanding: her bodyguard, Barry Manake, who later died tragically in a road accident, art expert Oliver Hall, car salesman James Gilby. The world wanted Diana to throw herself wholeheartedly into a great love affair with a wonderful man who would carry her off and give her the happiness she deserved. It never happened. Her life was a shambles, trapped in a sham marriage, betrayed by her husband, abandoned by his family, constantly fighting palace conspiracies while raising 2 sons and maintaining a grueling schedule of royal duties. After the separation, she became a single mom, sharing custody of William and Harry, determined to give them the childhood Charles never had. She took them to McDonald's, movie theaters, normal places ordinary kids went. She wanted them to experience what regular British people experienced, not just the isolated privilege of royal life. She lavished them with affection, cuddles, and love everything she'd been denied by Charles. Even Charles had to admit she was a generous mother who raised them with beautiful manners as pretty normal children. But the endless compensation, winter holidays in the Caribbean followed by skiing in the Alps, summers at Balmoral followed by Mediterranean yacht trips, meant the boys were getting too much too soon. It destroyed their sense of proportion and values. William especially seemed to suffer whenever he faced the media. He was a very sensitive boy who'd seen his mother's unhappiness and loved his father too much to blame him, leaving him confused about the rights and wrongs of the whole situation. Diana was aware of the problems facing her young son, thrown into the public role of future king against the background of his parents' very public separation. She'd been thrown into royal life at 20 with a crash course in performing. William would have to endure the same lessons, but with the added burden of his parents' scandalous breakdown poisoning every step forward, and the ghost of his mother's suffering would haunt him forever. When the truth finally exploded in 1992, it was with cruel irony that Windsor Castle itself burst into flames, a symbol of the malaise consuming the monarchy from within. The Queen attended a London banquet and summed up her feelings as a monarch, wife, and mother whose family and home had suffered immeasurable damage. 1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis, a horrible year that dented royal authority badly. If Hollywood had spent a year trying to write this script, they couldn't have conceived such crazy developments. Leaked tapes, topless photos, public separations, a castle fire, multiple divorces. It was almost too absurd to believe, but it was all real. The institution of monarchy survived, but barely. It had weathered the 1936 constitutional crisis when King Edward VIII abdicated to marry divorced American Wallis Simpson. Now, 60 years later, whether Charles would marry Camilla after divorcing Diana remained an open question. Either way, his future was in the hands of the women surrounding him. If he wanted to succeed to the throne, marrying Camilla was totally out of the question, according to many experts. But Charles felt a strong sense of duty. He wanted to be a good king, to fulfill his destined role. Some thought Charles and Camilla would make a wonderful husband and wife. Queen Camilla? The British public wouldn't accept that. The world would probably laugh. They wanted the excitement, the style, the panache, the glamour of Diana. Diana would be a hard act to follow the perfect princess, even if she wasn't the perfect wife in Charles's eyes. Since her separation, Diana retired from public life, and royal visits went by almost totally unnoticed without her. Her ability to keep the monarchy in tune with changing social attitudes would be sorely missed. She'd achieved so much for the nation and the monarchy, filling an amazing gap in royal ranks that nobody realized existed until she arrived. She was Britain's golden girl who helped glamorize the last major monarchy on Earth and made it internationally renowned. She elevated Great Britain's status enormously because everyone worldwide was interested in their princess. But the palace had destroyed her, and now they were left with nothing but the dusty, boring protocols that Diana had temporarily illuminated with her star power. The fairy tale was dead. The tapes had exposed the ugly truth, and the monarchy would never recover its mystique. So here's my question for you. Knowing everything you know now about how the royal family betrayed Diana, how Charles never stopped his affair, how they all conspired to silence her, do you still believe in the British monarchy? Do you think Charles deserved to become king? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. If this video exposed truths the palace tried to bury, smash that subscribe button and share it with someone who still thinks the royals are all dignity and honor. Because Diana's story proves that even in palaces, the villains sometimes win. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.